As the first phase of the hostage agreement ends, Israel is going back to war in Gaza to eliminate Hamas. President Trump and Vice President Vance have an argument with Volodymyr Zelekskyy in the Oval Office as the U.S. administration's rhetoric continues to move in a more pro-Russian direction. And finally, why is the woke right attacking Western moralism and Winston Churchill in particular? Welcome to Inside Israel News, your home for American conservative commentary on international affairs and thorough and unbiased analysis of Israeli news, politics, and current events in the Middle East. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. This is Inside Israel News. I'm your host, Isaac Kite. Welcome back, Insiders. It is I, once again, your lovable lawnsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your prophet of things to come, your shadow president. Once more, we'll be attacking the issues and discussing what's going on in the world. Some sad things to start off with, and then try to get into some of the good news and the frustrating and infuriating news thereafter. But, we'll dive into all of that. It's been a couple of weeks. I would like to get episodes out weekly, but I'm killing myself out here working, so it's been quite a thing. But I'm going to try and work on that and getting that fixed for you guys. I know I should be posting more often. I'm trying. I really am. But I try to get you the content when I can. But a weekly episode would be a vast improvement. So I'm going to try to work toward that. Rebrand of the show coming, possibly a new name. I've been talking about it for a while. I'll discuss that in the next episode. But I've had some problems with people misunderstanding the name. They see Inside Israel News and they think the show's all about Israel, and they don't. They think I'm Israeli, like living in Israel, and that's not true. I'm an American conservative commentator, and most of what I do on here now is geopolitics. Now, originally, I did start the show to talk mostly about Israel, and, try to get like a weekly episode with 25 minutes about Israeli news, but that just didn't continue that way. I had, too many people asking, talk about European politics and that stuff that impacts Israeli politics on some level. And then I got into talking about other events, and I couldn't help but comment on America. So the show's grown and expanded. So I'm going to have a name that reflects that. Stand by. Just keep your ear to the ground. Keep your eyes open. Good things are coming. Interesting stuff coming up. All right, let's get into the sad news. Ariel and Shiri Bibas, this still really bothers me. And, I have 7 children, and I have 2 young boys. And, we have a baby, my daughter, Cecily, the cricket. But I have 2 young boys out of my 7, And the thought of who could strangle a toddler and a baby to death in a tunnel underground, what kind of people do this? Not people, monsters, for sure. But then you have to ask yourself, what kind of culture encourages this? What kind of culture produces men, if that's the proper term, who behave this way? I mean, I can't imagine anyone wanting to do such a thing. It's horrifying. And then they mutilated the bodies to make it look like they had been killed in an airstrike. The autopsy reports that confirm the strangulation, of course, have been circulated to a number of governments. Israel always having to prove that what we say is the case, because people would believe in a heartbeat that Israel bombed a hospital in Gaza, even though it was a parking lot and it was a rocket from Islamic Jihad fired from within Gaza. But when we say that babies were beheaded or put into ovens on 10/7. 23, we have to prove it. We have to show the evidence because, Jews are sniveling, conniving trolls with horns on their heads who, would lie about everything. Oh, God. So I had a moment of silence in the last episode on behalf of those 2 boys. This is absolutely sickening. And then on top of that, there's the spectacle. They get their people together. They're throwing, flour and stuff in the air, and they're playing music, and they've got everybody out in their, their Hamas outfits with their little green, rags on their heads and all this kind of schlock. I mean, they're making a real show of this. They're celebrating it. Again, what kind of culture celebrates the death of children? I talked about these people dehumanizing themselves. Well, my friends, there's that. I mean, another thought that's been going around and people haven't paid enough attention to it. So I'm going to put my finger on this point because I've been talking about the culture that encourages this kind of behavior. In the Second World War, when the Germans moved all the Jews to the ghettos, there were Germans who hid Jews, right? Anne Frank's family were in the Netherlands, and there was a Dutch family that hid them. They suffered terrible consequences when they were caught. Okay, there are people like Oskar Schindler who put his neck out. I mean, he managed to get away with it, but he stuck his neck out to save lives, right? He was a German. Okay, there were people who saw what was happening, knew it was wrong, right? Himmler himself has, a speech you can go find on YouTube where he tries to justify morally all the things that they're doing. At the end, they tried to hide it, right? They tried to bury and burn all the bodies and try to, hide the camps and destroy the evidence, right? The Soviet army and the allies from the West were moving too quickly, and ultimately they weren't able to hide all of it. And, of course, Stalin, was probably looking at it like, wow, that's brilliant. Wish I'd thought of that. But, it's more efficient than his gulags. But when it comes to the Gaza Strip, right, on October 7th, these guys were wearing, cameras, GoPros, right? They were filming all of this stuff. They were celebrating it. People were dancing in the streets. There's that video of Naama Levy being led out of the Jeep, and they're all shouting Allahu Akbar in the background. They're celebrating this, right? Not one person in Gaza, not one tried to help the hostages. No one tried to hide them. No one tried to get them extra food. No one tried to protect them from abuse. No one tried to help them escape. Not one. Now, when you want to ask the measure of depravity, mental illness, and utter sickness in a society, I think that is it right there. So when Trump talks about relocating people from Gaza, that would be a blessing. These people are just, and they say, Hamas isn't the Palestinians. Well, I mean, they would have won the election. Ismail Haniyeh was leading all summer long. I told you go back and listen to my, in 2023, all summer long, I kept talking about the polls that, Hamas was leading in the polls if there was a Palestinian presidential election, right? Mahmoud Abbas isn't terrorist enough for the Palestinians. They wanted more. They wanted October 7th, and they got it. And now, they murdered babies. And they celebrated rape and murder on a grotesque scale. So this is just the kind of evil we're up against. Okay, so with that, those two poor boys, just their only crime was being Jewish, and they were strangled a month after the horrifying attack in which they were kidnapped. I mean, who kidnaps children, let alone? They were strangled to death in a dark tunnel underground by monsters from a monstrous culture that promotes that kind of horror. And if you are talking to anyone out there, my friends, and you hear, you mentioned the Bibas brothers. Oh, yes, but you have to understand, they're just resisting. The Israelis do this all the time. Remind them, they're siding with the child murderers. They're siding with the rapists. So just so they know, that's whose side they're on, right? That's make it clear. Don't let them get away with that. On top of this, there is the second sickening aspect of this. Instead of sending the remains of Shiri Bibas, the mother of the Bibas boys, the terrorists returned a body that was not an Israeli. It was a Gaza woman that they sent. Again, more sick and twisted games from this lot. What they think they were accomplishing, I can't say, but it's extremely, extremely awful. So finally, the actual remains of Shiri Bibas were returned, and Israel was able to get those back. And the Israelis withheld releasing terrorists to prevent. Saying, look, we're not going to put up with this. No more of the music and the show and the games. We're not doing it. And then, Hamas started cooperating and releasing the next set of remains without fanfare, right? But the insult is already done. It's sickening. Terrorism back on the rise. A number of bombs found on Israeli buses, one of which blew up. But thanks to the faulty detonators, they're terrorists, but they're not very good at being terrorists. So thanks to the faulty detonators, the bus driver was able to get his passengers off, and then other bombs were removed. But again, unfortunately, terrorists are being released, and we're seeing an uptick in terrorism. Strange thing. Obviously, getting our people back is important, but at what price? This is the kind of sickening nonsense that these games we have to go through. So that's all of that. Oh my God. I don't know. It's just a point where people lose all humanity. And when people behave that way, we've come a long way as a species, but these people choose to behave in a manner that is subhuman. And, it's not me. I'm not the one who behaved that way. They did. And they deserve what results. So that's where we're at now. The war. So Israel has cut off aid to Gaza. There's less supplies going in at this point, and they're going to go back in and bomb Hamas. And of course, there have been some negotiations about the possibility of getting more hostages released. But as Trump has been calling for, Hamas to release the rest of them, like all together, or else, right? And Israel's kind of getting into a similar place. Like, look, you guys release all of the hostages and we have a ceasefire. Otherwise, we're at war, right? And so there have been some negotiations toward a phase 2, but there's not much point. We've seen the games that they're playing, and we're not here to play games. So that's that. So Bibi and his government are going back to war with these guys. So it's going to be more conflict. And, at any time they can release the hostages and Hamas can surrender. And this is over. Right. Anyway, some good news. So the bomb shipment that was withheld to Israel, just a small shipment of bombs, like 1,800 bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, and this kind of stuff. The kinds of things that Israel uses in wars more against like Hezbollah and in Syria, right? Not the kind of bombs they would use a lot in Gaza. Well, the Biden administration made a big show of withholding these, and it was stupid. Well, now something like nearly 4,000, like 3,500, 4,000 of these bombs are on their way to Israel. Thank you, Trump administration. What a difference an election makes. So there's that. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio said they found $4 billion in aid that was appropriated for Israel that hasn't been given. And so that is being given. So Israel is getting money and weapons that it needs to continue doing a great job defeating America's enemies and Israel's enemies, because they are one and the same. So there you are. there was supposed to be at the end of phase one, withdrawal of Israeli forces from what's called the Philadelphia corridor. That's the Gaza side of the Egyptian border. But Israeli forces are staying there, and there's been a lot of talk of keeping this. And you have to understand this issue from an internal Israeli point of view, because this is kind of hot button. There are a lot of people on the Israeli left who are saying that Bibi is full of it because he wouldn't negotiate over hostages because he wanted to keep this corridor. At the same time, this corridor is critical to Israel's security because we have seen that Egyptian generals were, taking bribes, and, Hamas was running tunnels under there and running all kinds of things into Gaza, weapons and what have you, which are, not only bad for Israel, but Hamas is an enemy of Egypt. So it's not good for them either. But, So we need to control that territory. So I'm glad to see that Israel is staying there and the Philadelphia corridor will be secure. Now, there's some more excitement going on in Syria. That's kind of an interesting thing there. So talked a few episodes back about HTS's takeover. We're hearing more and more that was really Turkey that did that. I mean, we knew that Turkey was behind HTS and that they were helping them. One of the reasons that al-Jolani, the leader of HTS, backed away from Islamic State and al-Qaeda was so that he could ally himself with Turkey, and get more support there. And funny thing, now he's kind of top dog in Syria. Well, the Druze who live in southern Syria. So if you think of Syria, it's kind of an oddly shaped country. Thank you, Britain and France. I've commented before with the Sykes-Picot agreement that they made there. It looks like kindergartners took crayons and drew, random lines in the Middle East to make countries. And I've had people come back, well, it wasn't crayons. They did that very deliberately. It looks like they were dividing up these tribes and nations very deliberately. I'm like, yeah, that's not the point. The point of my joke is that it looks like a kindergartner took crayons to it. Okay? Yes, they did very deliberately carve up the Middle East to keep the Kurds from having their own country and, to put large groups in large number of Shiites were under the control of the Sunnis in Iraq, right? There were a number of things like that, and they drew a kingdom for the Hashemites in Jordan. That was the other half of the British mandate of Palestine, right? That was the Muslim state, the Palestinian state. It was created out of the original mandate, which included all of what is now Israel and Jordan. So Syria. So the Druze, and I've talked about the Druze before. They consider themselves an Islamic movement, but they're more Socratic, based on Socratic philosophies. So they're a little different. Like the Alawites, they're a little different from the Sunni Muslim majority in Syria, and as a result, they faced a lot of persecution. So we're looking at Syria now, right? You've got the northern border with Turkey, kind of a straight line, and then it kind of has this hypotenuse of the triangle that comes down along the border of Iraq and Jordan, and then there's this curvature along the bottom as you come up to the Golan Heights, which are now Israel permanently, and then up along the mountains around Lebanon, and then you get back to the seacoast, which goes up to the Turkish border there. So in the bottom of that hypotenuse, in the corner between Israel and Jordan, there's this area south of Damascus, that this is where you have the Druze population, and there's also a large Christian minority there as well. And something like 20% of the population that lives there is also Sunni Muslim. So Israel has taken over parts of those areas to secure them and prevent the Druze from being mistreated. Some of those Druze villages have voted that they want to be part of Israel. We're such, sniveling, conniving trolls bent on genocide that, there are various minorities in the Middle East who want to become part of Israel. So now HTS has been attacking the Druze in a suburb of Damascus, and Israel and the Druze, other Druze forces in the area, have come to put a stop to that. And so Israel is defending the Druze in southern Syria and also Christians. So, there's the buffer zone is being expanded to cover that southern area, and the Druze have already decided to establish a national army. So they have some national aspirations there. Possible, pseudo-state at the very least, like the SDF, which are the Kurdish forces in the northeastern part of the country, right? The Druze will have a stronger position at the negotiating table as one of the major groups in the country. I mean, they're not the major group, but when Syrians sit down, you would have to have the Alawites, the Kurds, HTS, and the Druze now, right? Because they're part of the equation. Well, that's not getting reported, but, Israel is preventing the massacre of minorities in Syria. It would be truly wonderful if pluralism could prevail once again in Syria. When it was under control, unfortunately, when it was under control of the Assad regime, they were brutal and they were cruel to their people. But minorities were relatively protected. The Druze, the Alawites, who, the Alawites ran the country, right? And the Christians. So things have gotten worse there, and it's a terrible story. So Israel's doing its part to defend those. So it seems that southern Syria could now become a sanctuary in the Middle East for Druze and Christians. So there's that. Now, on the larger Syria thing, obviously Turkey, wants to take control of Syria. There's been talk that perhaps Israel is working to try to keep the Alawite area separate and not let HTS take that over. There's been talk of... So there are rumors that spread all over the place suggesting that somehow Israel's trying to help keep Russian bases there. I'm not entirely sure of that. But the idea is that there are efforts to create a counterweight to HTS in Syria and keep them from taking over the rest of the country, where Turkey is basically backing them. So, they have a lot of support. So we'll see how that goes. But Syria is a mess. And, as a failed state, Israel is getting in there and getting more involved in protecting minorities there. So that's something you need to know about Syria, because you want to know everything. All right. I like to take listener questions whenever I can. And I had a comment from listener Tanya, you know who you are, asking about my position on pro-Palestinian ultra-Orthodox Jews. So I'm definitely gonna address that issue. Let me first say, speaking of my background, so, I grew up in a secular family. I'm just a landsman, not a macher, not a rich guy, just, I work for a living, I do pretty well for myself, I think, working for a living, but, that's where I came from. And as a teenager, I began learning about religion. So I started going to Reform and Conservative, eventually stepped into Chabad for a while, studied with a bunch of different rabbis, went to Israel. I studied at the yeshiva that was founded by the Hazon Ish. My Israeli listeners, you'll know who that was, but he was a major and inspirational religious figure in early Israeli history. As all of these Jews gathered in Israel, various religious, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, various kinds of Ashkenazic, the Lithuanian school, which he represented, who were mitnagdim, not hasidim. That's not something you guys really need to worry about. Jewish politics, intra-Jewish politics. Anyway, he kind of brought the Orthodox together in Israel and created an atmosphere where they could all kind of get along and, live together. And so he's credited with a lot of that. So I studied in his yeshiva. Now, his yeshiva no longer teaches his particular ideology. So in order to learn more about the Hazon Ish, I had to go meet with the Mensch-Kites. That's what they're called. They're kind of the last, not entirely the last, but they're kind of the last of the Lithuanian school, for those who know that history. And they have a really interesting community there in Bnei Brak. So I got to meet with them and learn from them as well. Also met with the Samaritans, spent some time studying with the Karaite Jews. I love learning about all kinds of different Jewish religious movements. The Samaritans don't consider themselves Jews, but they do have an interesting history there to learn about. But anyway, yeah, so I've learned a lot about Jewish religion, and I continue to live a religious but secular appearing lifestyle. I'm not Orthodox myself. That said, when I was in Israel, I was absolutely horrified by some of the behaviors of the ultra-Orthodox, as they call them. I hate using that term. We have a term Haredi in Hebrew, and that's just a better term, I think. But the people with the black hats and the the hair locks, right? The peyote, and the black coats and all this kind of thing. And there are various types, the people in the fur hats, and there's Satmars, and there's Breslevers, and, there's lots of different movements. Okay. I don't like that the men prefer to study in yeshiva instead of taking care of their families like they're supposed to. I mean, they established this idea that, some of the men could study religion, right? We need a certain number of rabbis. We need a certain number of spiritual leaders, but not everyone can be one, right? So you can't have all the men going to school instead of working, right? And they try to dodge the draft. They don't join the military, and that's been an issue that's gone back and forth. I believe, if you look at the great Jewish scholars, Rashi was a shoemaker. The Rambam, Maimonides, was a doctor. There are very few people who did full-time studying as religious scholars. Like, they had other jobs, and they did their studies on the side. And look, I know how it is. You come home from a long, hard day at work, and you're tired, and you want to spend time with your family and that kind of thing. But you can also take a little bit of time to crack open, a copy of Talmud or, the Torah itself, and read and learn and gather perspectives. And that can be aided by people who are able to study full-time, because a certain percentage of the population can. Maybe, the 1 in 10 best, brightest minds, gifted minds in religion can go study to be rabbis, and then they can teach everyone else, after work, and they can run services at shul on Shabbat where everyone can learn and this kind of thing. Okay, so my point. There are a lot of things I don't like about their lifestyle. That said, I have talked about before, there is a significant amount of discrimination in Israel against the Haredi. They don't get jobs, and, the secular people complain about the Haredi taking all this welfare and social services and, public money for them, so that, the men can work and the women, work 2-3 jobs while raising 10 kids. And some of the women get osteoporosis in their 30s because they're so exhausted and malnourished and that kind of thing. So anyway, it's a lifestyle I don't support. I don't have a problem with people being Orthodox. I just think men need to work to feed their families. And you could argue that's an American thing, but, I read my Torah and it says 6 days you will work, you will labor, right? And the 7th day you will rest. So when it says you will labor, that's what you labor at, not studying religion. You labor at something, sell something, make something, dig a hole, drive something, 6 days you do your work, right? Sit in an office and do paperwork, something. Okay. Anyway. All right. And of course, my opinion about serving your country. I once wore America's uniform. People should serve. Okay. There are movements out there that do not support Israel. And they're, so let's define them broadly in 2 different groups. You have the sort of secular, as I call them, communist people, they're Jews in name only, right? They're secular leftists, they're communists basically, and they just don't want to be called white. Okay, so that's one category of people. And some of them are pro-Israel, because it turns out Israel was founded as a socialist country. It's moved away from that, but the time was people on the left supported Israel because it was a left-wing country. As it's become more capitalist, that's become less so the case. And of course, now wokeness is all about racial stuff, and whatever is bad, we're it, right? As I've talked about before. To the capitalist, the Jew is a communist. To the communist, the Jew is a capitalist. If ice cream is bad, look, Jews eat ice cream. We're always the bad guys. So naturally, we're white, because They said so. Now, you go to Israel, walk down the street. Okay? Go to Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv, go to Allenby, just, walk around. Just take a walk down the street. Now, you will see people there who are Polish descended, who are Jews who lived in Poland, right? You'll see a couple of redheads, right? You'll a few carrot tops occasionally, okay? And you'll see people like me. I look very Northern European. In fact, for the umpteenth time, I've had a Russian come up to me and start speaking to me in Russian because there are all these people that think I'm Russian. Apparently, that's what I look like to them. In any case, okay, so, but you'll also see a lot of people who look Yemeni and Ethiopian, and, you'll see all kinds of different Jews of different shades, right? And people who look Arab and what have you. So, you walk down the street and you will see a very broad variety of faces staring back at you. And you will understand that Jews are not white. Now, if you live in America or France or whatever, most of the Jewish people you will encounter will have fair skin, like me, okay? But that doesn't mean that we're all white. Like half the Jews are darker shades, okay? All right. So, listener Tanya wanted to know about my position on Orthodox movements that oppose Israel and support the Palestinians. There are movements out there like Nutre Karta that... I don't want to bore you with Jewish politics. Let's just say they believe that Israel will be reestablished by Mashiach. That's Messiah for those of you in real India. And that the state of Israel, therefore, isn't legitimate. And they use this as an excuse then to go around to all of Israel's enemies to shake hands with, there are pictures of them with Ahmadinejad and Rafsanjani and, in Iran. And they're always, celebrating Israel's enemies against the Jewish people and against Israel because they don't want this Israel to exist. They want Israel to be reestablished by Mashiach. And so they go out there just like those secular communist leftist people who call themselves Jews, right? And they protest for the Palestinians. Now, you want to know what I think about it? It's despicable. Let me say that one more time. It is despicable for any Jew to turn on our fellow people. We are a nation of people, and we have so many disagreements. Let me tell you, my friends, I mean, you get into a group of Jews, first of all, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? I mean, such diverse thought. These like Jewish World Congress, these events, Zionist Organization of America. You get into any of these events and people start talking and it's like you will hear opinions from way out in left field, way out in right field, to some pretty reasonable stuff, and somebody who's, philosophically on some other plane, who's just, in another zone, and you're like, wow, that guy really, he knows a lot of stuff. He's kind of off topic right now, but the point is, we have a broad range of opinions, and that is a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful thing to have disagreements, to have different life experiences. As a landsman, I have a very different experience from a macher, somebody who grew up in a macher household, went to macher shul, pearls, diamonds, nice cars, they upscale, all the private education and all that kind of good stuff. Great. I'm just a lunchman down here. My dad worked for a living. I went to public school, sadly. And everything I learned, everything that made me intelligent, I learned on my own at home, for the most part. I had a few good teachers who did teach me some things. I will admit that. But most of my public school education was me arguing and fighting with the teachers because, first of all, I was badly treated, but also I just don't play along, as you can tell. Do I sound? Does Lord Isaac sound like a guy, who just gets along to get along and easy to conform and I just, I just play along with people? No. I have a funny way of saying what I think. So here's what I think. I think there's a line. There's a point at which we have to stop our opinions. We can disagree. We can, you can be Jewish and think that we should make peace. How you can do that, I don't know, given people who are strangling babies in tunnels. I don't see anybody there I can make peace with. They don't want to make peace with us. They want to kill us. So there you are. But you can have all these different opinions. Where I draw the line is when you harm other Jews. All right. think of it in American terms just for a second. Like, you can be an American who has all kinds of opinions. You can think China's great, and you can think, that communism's wonderful. The point at which your opinions get Americans killed is a line that you shouldn't cross, right? So let's just say, China's taken hostages, American hostages or something. And, if people go on college campuses and shout and protest, kill the hostages, that would be a bit much, don't you think? More than a little tasteless, okay? There's a point where you cross the line. We have a definition for treason in the U.S. Constitution, giving aid and comfort to your enemies. And, or as they might say in British English, when you give succor to your enemies, right? I love the speeches that Tony Blair used to give. I know he's pro-Europe and that kind of, but I love the days of Tony Blair, because it was great listening to him make these speeches and talk about these things, and it's like, these the Taliban have given succor to terrorists of Al-Qaeda and this kind of thing. It was really great to listen to back in the day. So I was much enamored with it. Anyway, if you are giving aid and comfort to the enemies of your people, of your country, of your people, you've crossed the line. And that's what I think of Orthodox and communist Jews, purportedly Jews, who oppose Israel and protest for the Palestinians. It's despicable. They are celebrating murder, and they're encouraging the murder of more Jews. And I can see, with the communist people, they don't actually believe in anything, so I understand that. But how you could read Torah, how you can read Talmud and justify that, I don't know. Because, the first moral lesson we are taught, the first moral lesson that we're taught, I think, is disobeying God. Like Adam and Hava, they went out, they ate the fruit of knowledge, and now they have the knowledge of good and evil, and God's like, I told you not to eat that. Now you have to be responsible for yourselves. Bye-bye, Gan Eden. No more garden of ignorant bliss. You are off in the world. Your fields are going to grow thorns for you now. You're going to live in civilized cities with slavery and oppression and mass murder, and you're gonna face horrors that you don't know about right now, because now you know good and evil. All right. The second moral lesson we are taught between Cain and Abel, for those of you in Rio Linda, translating these things for you guys, is that murder is wrong, right? His blood still cries from the ground. Okay, well, Jewish blood is screaming from the ground in Gaza. And I don't know how you can be, call yourself a Jew and be okay with that. You can have whatever opinion you want about the war and about the conflict and all these kinds of things. I don't care. Okay, but we have to draw the line there at the murder of our own kind. So I'm gonna cut that off there, because this kind of stuff really riles me up, as you can tell. Your gregarious Vulcan is not being a very good Vulcan these days. I'm getting very emotional and this kind of thing. So when I come back, I am going to move on to talking about. I'll have a little interlude here on another topic regarding the Trump-Gaza thing, but then I'm going to talk about the Oval Office, and, because I have to. Everyone's got their thing to say about it, and I've got a few things to say too. So you'll hear my opinion on that shortly. All right, so as you know, I subscribe to the Good Intentions newsletter from Bob Zeidman. He's written a couple of great books that I for one, have really enjoyed. Good Intentions, about kind of a future where wokeness is taken to some of its illogical conclusions, and the characters discover the value of freedom and law and justice in the course of their adventure. So very good story there. And, of course, Animal Lab, which is kind of a new spin on Orwell's Animal Farm. Interesting concepts there. But the Good Intentions newsletter also helps you stay informed. If you're a news junkie like me, it's a must. recent article that Bob had in there is from Daniel Pomerantz again. And he asked the question, what do Israelis really think of Trump's plan to evacuate Gaza? And he notes, of course, Pomerantz does, that most of the attention in Israel really is focused on the release of the hostages and the conflict with Hamas. That's really the crux of what everyone's paying attention to. That's what we want to hear about. So these other things that you hear out there, including Trump's plan, a lot of that is kind of noise in the background when you're focused on these things. It's hard to explain, but Israel is a small country. 8 million people. I mean, everyone knows everyone, and that's a really difficult thing to grasp about the thing. If you know 100 people, you know half of Israel, because you'll bump into someone on the street and have a brief conversation, and in the course of that conversation, they'll mention someone you know. Like, everyone knows everyone through some. I mean, if you have 3 friends, you know everyone. You know what I mean? And if you know certain kinds of people, like the guy who runs the store, or the taxi driver, or the tivuch, which is they're like a real estate agent, then huge group. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are people who are very connected in terms of social networks, and I don't mean that like Facebook. I mean like actually knowing a whole bunch of people. And so it's like I'm sitting there, talking to my real estate agent, and I was like, and I've got to go to the immigration office and have a meeting about my visa, my student visa thing, and he's like, oh yeah, my brother works there, he da. So I mean, it's like everybody there knows somebody, a whole bunch of people. Anyway, so on the question of Trump's Gaza plan, generally speaking, 73% of Israelis support the plan, and this is interesting. So it's almost all of the Israeli Jews support the idea of voluntary or, a relocation of the Gaza residents. But half of the Israeli Arabs do too. What do you think about that, my friends? Now, Arabs know Arabs, right? They know who they're dealing with here, and half of them are supporting this, right? I think that speaks volumes right there. So half of the Israeli Arabs support doing that as well. So Pomerantz is making the point that it used to be just a right-wing opinion. There were a lot of people on the right, especially those who are fans of Meir Kahane. I want to say that I haven't been a fan of Meir Kahane because his philosophy was rather militant, and he talked a lot about having to relocate these populations and being very tough on them. One of the things that people have noted is a lot of the things like October 7th and post seem to be teaching people that Kahane was right about a lot of things. So that's one of those. Maybe he's a modern day Yeftah, a biblical character who's kind of an outcast, and but later on we're like, oh yeah, he saved, he did some good things. The jury's still out on that one, but let's just say at the moment, on the balance, on the whole, Meir Kahane is more right than he was wrong. So we have to accept that reality, right? So anyway, it used to be considered a far right opinion to argue that we should relocate any part of the Palestinian population. But now 73% of Israelis, including half of Israeli Arabs, support the idea. So that's huge. And it's all across the political spectrum. People left and right support that. It's no longer a fringe far-right opinion, is the point that he's making. So that's the point that Pomerantz is trying to take. Now, again, Israeli attentions are focused elsewhere. So Trump's Gaza plan is background noise in a large part. So I'm not going to say that everyone's thought it through heavily, but it is interesting that 73% would support the plan. Thank you, Bob Zeidman and the Good Intentions newsletter for bringing that to our attention. Go check out goodintentions.com, sign up for the newsletter, and you can learn that as well. And entertain yourself and amuse yourself with the books, because I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of stuff, a little fiction, I should say. I read a lot. I read some fiction, and, it's always really good to read an author who thinks like you do. You know what I mean? And so it's not all this woke nonsense that you get. Been enjoying watching a series. It's kind of an anime, but it's also more of like a game. It's more like a video game. Anyway, it's Arcane. I got back on Netflix briefly to watch a few things. And it's interesting to watch. And it's like in most of your anime stories, it's all over the place and this kind of thing. It's got a kind of a steampunk edge to it that amuses me. But the wokeness gets to be a bit much. It's like there are a couple of characters in it, there are two characters in it who are gay. Like two, and all of a sudden it's like everybody's gay. Like these two ladies just happen to like each other, and that's fine. But then they can find all kinds of other partners out there, and I'm just sitting here like wow, this society is very tolerant, but also everyone they're all over the place. 2% of the population. At most. I grant that they've convinced some of Gen Z to be, that everyone's gay. And now 1 in 5 Gen Z people think they're trans, gay, or something. What's really unfortunate for them, though, is that the overwhelming majority of Gen Z thinks that wokeness is for ugly people. Like wokeness is what ugly people do to protect themselves or make themselves feel better. And that's a sad opinion. But where does that opinion come from, right? And it's like, look, people, you're still valuable just because you're not, a model or whatever. Like, I'm kind of a big guy. I don't think anybody looks at me and is like, wow, that guy's handsome. At one point, one crazy lady did, and thankfully she was quite crazy enough to say yes when I popped the question. So, Baruch Hashem for that. But, I don't think I'm going to be winning any beauty contests myself anytime soon. But look, it's like, I am what I am. I am what God made me. He made me the way he wanted me to be. And there's some things I have control over. If I do a few more push-ups and eat a few less burgers, I'd probably look a little better. So that's actually something I'm working on, is walking more and doing more push-ups, getting more exercise, and just, I drive a lot for work, but thankfully, the work that I've been doing lately, I've been able to get a little more walking in and doing a little bit more physical movement that I like. I got to move. Like I love walking and moving around, and I can't sit in an office. But driving all day, that takes it out of me too, because I need to move around. Anyway, so interesting point about that entertainment, but it's like, the characters who don't, who form these emotional attachments, and they're all about, I love you, and then they replace their lover like it's nothing. Like, they get mad at them for nothing. They have no commitment to them. They run off with someone else. And it's like, wow, this is a really wonderful society we're describing here, I'm telling you right now, like if I tried to walk away from my wife, like in 5 minutes, like I'd walk out the door and I'd come right back up the steps. I am terrified of what life would look like if I didn't have my partner. Like without her, I'm nothing. Like I couldn't, I can tie my shoes, but I wouldn't be able to organize myself. So, come on, people, like you can't have characters that are running around to everybody and whatever. Anyway, my commentary on that. So, that's entertainment for now. There was some ridiculous stuff at the Oscars. This documentary that BBC made. God, what a joke. It turns out it was the son of a Hamas terrorist leader who was the kid in it, and it's just, it's BBC's now in trouble for it because taxpayer money went to Hamas in the process of making it. So there are going to be some legal battles there. But, when you make propaganda films, that's what you get. I hope, this British government isn't likely to, but I really hope the British government gets rid of BBC. I mean, just they don't shut it down, but I mean, BBC collects taxes. Like there's a tax that they're allowed to collect, a connection fee to watching TV. Get rid of all of that. Get rid of their government authority. They're done. Anyway, all right. On to bigger and better things, my friends. Nothing I want to talk about. Oh, but I have to. This Trump-Zelenskyy meeting. You have to watch the whole thing. If you watch 50 minutes of it, it's all fine. Everything's going swimmingly. Zelenskyy thanks Trump for his support and America for helping Ukraine and all of this kind of stuff in the very meeting that they're talking at. And then after a little while, J.D. Vance starts antagonizing him. And that's where people need to stop and just take a deep breath here. Volodymyr Zelekskyy is not a fluent English speaker. So he's in this situation where people are talking at him and they're using these tones that are aggressive. And he doesn't entirely understand everything that they're saying. He does understand most of it, but so it's absolutely unprofessional. Now, people are trying to say he was rude. I mean, he could have stopped talking while President Trump was talking, but he was trying to answer him. And Trump says, well, you're not holding very good cards. And Zelenskyy's like, I'm not here to play cards. Right. Now we've got all of the woke right out there about, well, why wasn't he wearing a suit? Why wasn't King, Mohammed bin Salman wearing a suit? Right. These are the same people, though, who, 5 minutes ago were complaining because Zelenskyy's wife, Zelenskova was in a photo shoot where she did a photo shoot for things. This video has been going around again. She got into a nice dress and did this photo shoot that they did for the war effort. And then all these people, oh, God, she's wearing a nice dress while people are dying in the fields and this kind of thing. So, Zelenskyy hasn't worn a suit since the war began. He's in soldier mode. He is fighting to save his country from total destruction. And he's become, the target of politics over here. So I'm disappointed with everyone there. I think Zelenskyy could have handled it better. I think the Donald could have handled it better. I think J.D. Vance is, he was a schloff, let's face it. I almost want to ask how much Russia paid him to act that way, but I hope I know better. Anyway, so that was a really unfortunate set of events, but it shouldn't have any bearing on policy. I'm really tired of this. Everything that happens is, if Trump doesn't like you, that's the policy of the United States all of a sudden. That, you get tariffs and you get these things. What happens if Bibi has a falling out with Trump? It's happened before. Is Trump going to start spreading Hamas's propaganda and switch sides? I mean, God forbid. I don't think that would happen. I'm just saying, the way things look, it's not a good look. It's not professional. Could we please? So that's that one particular event. You want to know my opinion? It was terrible. There's this issue here. I'm going to talk more about it in the next segment when I talk about the next topic. But we're seeing a departure right now from the Reagan-era Republican Party. During the Reagan era, the foreign policy of the United States was based on morality. Right? Reagan went out there and he said, he talked about the, evil empire and how, evil wasn't being done, out in fields and whatever. It was being made in just, in comfortable carpeted office buildings, that this is where the evil was beginning. He framed the Cold War in very moral terms that everyone could understand. We were the good guys, they were the bad guys, and on our worst day, we were still better than they were, and on their best day, they were still much, much worse than us. Okay, so this is the situation we were in. And, when groups like Solidarity that had no hope of ever driving the Soviet Union out of Poland, right? I mean, these people were just a hopeless, union of people working with the church trying to liberate Poland from Soviet control, right? Reagan would talk about them. He and Pope John Paul II, working together, and they would, he would cite them and say, look, the Solidarity movement is doing this, and this, and finally he got to, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and that was this great moment. If you see the Angel Studios movie with Dennis Quaid as Ronald Reagan, really great scene. They did that so well. Remember that from my childhood, and that was a great time. You can't. I didn't understand it at the time. Looking back, you just cannot understate, you cannot overstate the importance of that event, because he told Gorbachev how to end the Cold War and couched it in moral terms. But we don't do our foreign policy based on morality anymore. We have J.D. Vance out talking now about, well, you have to abandon this moral nonsense and you have to be real, live in reality. Well, I have to explain to the vice president that I can't do that, my friends. That is not possible for me. You see, 35 centuries ago, Moshe brought the people to the base of a mountain, and God spoke to them in his own voice. He spoke to the people, and the things he said were what you would call, most people call the 10 Commandments, right? The 10 utterances where God spoke for the first time. He said, you will not have other gods. You will not make graven images of gods that you'll worship. You will keep your oaths when you swear in my name. You will rest on the seventh day, Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. Every week you have to rest. That's my day. 6 days you will labor. That's my day. You will honor your father and your mother. You follow their traditions so that you keep the scriptures. So, all these things. God established these moral boundaries. Hashem demands, first and foremost from us, obedience, right? You look at all the stories from Abraham to David, always it was, if you will obey me, if you will serve me, I will make you a great nation. I will make you a great house. He told David, look, your house will be my house. Your son will be my son. I will make you a great house if you will serve me. And David remained loyal, even when he did some things that weren't completely kosher, getting Uriah killed and taking the man's wife, the court politics and that kind of thing. But he was chastened for it. Obedience. Now, the obedience that Hashem demands isn't just lip service. You have to obey these moral laws, right? I just described a few of them. Those are part of being obedient. But also, you don't kill and hate. You can't just go down the street and decide I don't like somebody and kill them, okay? You don't steal things that are not yours. You don't violate other people's marriages. I don't want somebody getting involved in mine. I'm not getting involved with somebody else. Don't run around outside of your marriage. Keep your marriage contracts. Don't bear false witness. If you didn't see someone commit a crime, don't come up and say they did. If you saw someone commit a crime, don't go up and say they didn't. Okay? Tell the truth when you're in court. Okay? And generally speaking, there's a principle of just generally being honest. Honest in your weights and measures, honest in your business dealings. Just generally be honest. Okay? You'll sleep better at night. Believe me, I do. And don't covet the things that aren't yours. And so many more laws about how you can treat your servants, which are like today's employment contracts. Like you can't abuse your employees, right? Laws about the treatment of animals, laws about what you can eat and how you can slaughter. All of these things fit into a big pattern of morality. And so all I have is morality, right? I serve that one master before I serve my country. Like my country is the most important thing to me. I love America. America is absolutely the most important thing to me, except I have one master above America, and he created everything. Okay? And the obedience he demands from me is morality. So if I have the vice president of the United States saying that we have to abandon the moral argument, I'm not with that. Now, I'm mostly annoyed at the means, so I'll take a step back here and look at the big picture. I just have to let you, my friends, feel my frustration with this approach. Okay, I think Trump has a strategy here. I think there's a thing he's trying to do. I don't like the way he's doing it. Now, I don't have to like the way he's doing it. I don't have to like the means. I don't think I'm going to like the ends either. And that's the part that bothers me. But the way things look right now are not really good. And I'll go into some of that a little bit more later. What Trump has been doing lately is saying the quiet part out loud. On the one hand, and he should be saying, the biggest frustration I have is all this attention's on Zelekskyy and Ukraine. Like they're the problem. Like they're the impediment to peace. Russia invaded Ukraine. They murdered children and put them in mass graves. The Russians are child murderers just like Hamas. There is no moral difference. Okay? And they're allies with Hamas and Iran. Right? I've told you guys that the Axis powers for years now. I've been talking about this. I go on and on. But anyway, the attention should be on Russia. The Russians are the bad guys. That's where the attention should be. By moving all of the talking points to Ukraine, we have given away everything we could negotiate over. Basically, as the Russians are saying, in the war between Russia and Ukraine, the first to surrender was America. right? We look really weak. And at the same time that we're looking really weak to the entire world, and especially, it's the thing, it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what I think. This is what Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping think, because those are the two men who run the Axis powers, right? Ali Khamenei, Kim Jong-un, all of these people are subservient to those two. More Xi Jinping than Vladimir Putin anymore, but those two people. There's a Chinese fleet that's been sailing off the coast of Australia, unmolested. They should be being followed and pursued by allied forces of vastly superior capabilities, but they're not. Threatening to cut off Australian contact with Tasmania, mostly just making a nuisance of themselves. But literally, they're out there threatening Australia. China's been threatening the Philippines for a long time, and Vietnam. At this point, and Taiwan, obviously, the most, this week, America looks really weak. We look like we're a bunch of wusses. I just have to say, at this point, the Chinese are doing whatever they feel like. We are bullying our allies, and, in Europe and in Ukraine, and to Putin and Xi, they're having a good laugh at us. So I just hope, I hope and I pray, please, Hashem, that Xi Jinping does not take from this, that, if he can take Taiwan, we'll let him keep it, because that seems to be the message out there right now. Now, part of the bullying of Europe, if I'm going to call it that, is a means to the end. Obviously, talk of withdrawing from NATO, the shift in rhetoric toward Ukraine and all of this is an attempt to drive the Europeans to do something about it. So this is where there's the quiet part out loud. Trump has been saying that quiet part out loud. The Western world does not have the stones, the cojones, if you will, to drive Russia out of Ukraine. We let the Russians massacre hundreds of thousands of Chechens. We did nothing. The Russians invaded Georgia. We did nothing. They invaded Ukraine the first time in 2014. We did nothing. Finally, we did something, but it's been ineffective. We've been willing to let Ukraine fight, but not give them what they need to win, right? So the quiet part out loud is, supposedly we're all for Ukraine, including the Biden administration, their policy of managed escalation, all the time thinking, oh God, I hope Putin doesn't get upset that we're sending weapons. Like, wait, if you're against Putin, you're against Putin. Then stop him. The hand-wringing is really ridiculous. And it's not just in the U.S., in Brussels, in London, in Paris, there's a constant hand-wringing. Oh God, we don't want to upset Vladimir Putin. So we have the strength to keep the war going by keeping Ukraine supplied, but we're not willing to win. And I think that's the quiet part that Trump's saying out loud. When he says, the reality he's talking about is we have neither the will, we have the means, but we don't have the political will to do anything about it. Since then, since Trump has taken this particular tack, Europe has changed. All of a sudden, European countries are going to be spending 4 or 5% of their GDP on their defense budgets. They've had several conferences and meetings, and especially in London recently, about how to do that. They're working on this. The new incoming chancellor in Germany. I'm going to talk about the German election. I promise you, but not today. Because I have just too many things to talk about. But Merz has won the election. He's going to start putting his coalition together. And Germany is talking about dumping hundreds of billions of euros into defense and infrastructure. Infrastructure also supports defense, right? Good roads, good airfields, right? That aids warfighting. So now Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, they're talking about stuff. So finally, they've sat down with Zelekskyy this week, and I'm speaking to you tonight, the night before President Trump's speech. I'm going to try to get this episode out this afternoon. So if you're listening to this, you've probably heard Trump's speech. I'll hear it too, but if I don't get this episode out now, I never will. So I'm not going to wait until the next, till after his speech. So I'll analyze his speech in the next thing. In any case, now Europe is getting off their butts. They're getting off their tuchuses, and they're doing something. They're talking about promoting a peace plan and that kind of thing. My frustrations are that we've abandoned Reagan's morality in this process. It would be one thing for Trump to go up and say, Russia invaded Ukraine, they've committed horrors, this is a terrible thing they've done. The reality of the situation is we don't have the will to stop them, right? And, it shouldn't be America's problem. Like, America could, but it shouldn't be our problem. And he's not wrong in this. We do need our resources elsewhere. Like, we really need our stuff to be in the Pacific, making sure Xi Jinping wakes up every day. Because I'm telling you, every day he wakes up, he makes that calculation in his head. Is today the day to attack and take Taiwan? And we want every day for him to get up and for the numbers not to add up. Like, for him to come to the conclusion, all of his own volition, that today is not the day, right? We want that to be a permanent state of affairs. The longer we can keep that going, the better. And we need all those resources over there. We are badly undermanned and ill-prepared. But even so, we do have greater moral strength and economic strength that we can bring to bear. The Russian economy was in terrible shape. Now, people have been going along, they're right. Pundits have been saying, the Russian economy is going to collapse anytime now. I don't know about collapse, but 22% interest rates and the ruble crashing, it was looking pretty bad for Russia. Now that the U.S. is talking about lifting sanctions and Trump is spouting Russian propaganda, the ruble has recovered. So I'm really disappointed with the situation. That said, in the near term, I just don't know that Russia is going to be able to be a threat to anyone else if this war came to an end. So I think that's Trump's ultimate goal. And if he has a strategy and if he has a big plan that's going to work this all out somehow, I'd like to see it. But right now, I'm not happy with the means. I don't like that we've abandoned the morality. I don't like that we're bullying our allies. We have all of this attention on this vile, evil Zelekskyy, this sniveling, conniving troll, because of course, he's a Jew, right? And so all the things that are said about him, he's a money grubber and this kind of thing. And so many lies, my friends, so many lies. Half the money is missing. Yeah, the money that Zelensky's talking about. So first of all, he's the one who told us that the money's missing. So if he had taken it, why would he tell us that? And what he means by missing is the U.S. government has supposedly given Ukraine $175 billion in aid. 90% of that, it comes in the form of weapons. Like we send weapons to Ukraine worth that amount of money. And some of it has been cash, very little bit, help their pension fund, try to keep their power on, try to help their economy. And yes, U.S. aid was in there doing some things that were stupid. We won't go there. But when Zelekskyy says they don't have that money, it means that they did not receive weapons worth that value. They didn't receive $175 billion in aid. And now Trump's out there talking about $350 billion. Where the heck he got that number from, I don't know. But whatever, So he's got this mineral deal. This annoys me as well. Granted, we lent a lot of money to Britain during the Second World War and expected to be paid back. We did give a lot of money, too. The fact is, you don't do the right thing because you profit from it. You do the right thing because it's the right thing. An evil dictator is invading one of the countries that is our ally. And, on our side, people that are friendly to us. Anyway. And then we get the thing, Zelenskyy's a dictator. He's shut churches and he arrested a journalist and killed a journalist and this kind of thing. So, there was an American journalist who was spreading Russian propaganda and helping the Russians target their weapons. And he was arrested, that's right, and he happened to die in prison. That happens to people, okay? But, when you are, harming Ukrainians, you get arrested. And yes, the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine works for the Russians. And, everyone there knows that the church became the stooges of the Communist Party, and now they're Putin's stooges. He knows the value of having control of the church. So they're working for the enemy. So yeah, he closed them. If you don't like any of that, that's okay. You don't have to like it. I would strongly suggest that you not look up Abraham Lincoln or study the history of the Civil War, because you're going to be very frustrated to find out that, oh my God, my friends, Abraham Lincoln closed churches, shut down newspapers, had journalists who were also spies tried it before military tribunals and executed to save this country, right? So whatever you do, don't look up Abraham Lincoln. Anything Zelensky's done, Abraham Lincoln has done. And there's this question of, elections. The Ukrainian legal, the law in Ukraine says they can't have elections in a war, but 20% of the country is occupied, right? I mean, we're going to have an election with, I talked about this. If Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were occupied by a foreign aggressor in the last election, would it have really been an election? My dear wife did a deep dive on wartime elections, and I've spent a lot of time here, my friends, talking with you about 1864, the aforementioned Civil War, and 1944, which are awkward elections. They aren't real elections, honestly. They're not like any other presidential election. She noted that 1968 is also technically a wartime election, and I hadn't thought about it that way. But the chaos of 1968, the rest is history. Another great podcast I listened to, Tom and Dominic went over, from a British perspective, the 1968 election, and they did a really great job analyzing it, in a factual way. So if you want, you can go over there and check out their analysis of the 1868 election. 1968 election, excuse me, I was thinking of the Civil War. Anyway, the 1968 election. But all of those elections had characteristics that, they were vastly different from regular elections, right? So as I mentioned, 1864, half the, 11 states were in rebellion. They didn't vote. There was no election in Texas in 1864 for president of the United States, right? And Tennessee and Louisiana voted and gave 17 electoral votes to Abraham Lincoln. But they were both occupied by the Union Army. And the only people who were allowed to vote were people who had sworn an oath to the Constitution. In other words, the hand-picked Union supporters, right? So Congress rejected those votes. Yes, we did technically hold an election, but it just wasn't a real election. And in 1944, how could you vote against Roosevelt, right? That, again, not a real election. Voting for Roosevelt was voting for winning the war, right? Voting against Roosevelt was voting against our troops. Not literally, but you get my point. It was your patriotic duty to win the war. And of course Roosevelt was going to win. He was a shoo-in, That was the main reason he ran. They could have had another Democrat on the ticket, but they wanted him to finish out the war. It needed to be him, and Truman was his hand-picked successor. 1968, again, awkward situation. A one-term president who was popular, right? The Civil Rights Act, the Freedom of Elections Act, Great Society, LBJ, seemed in 1965, he was in 66, he was riding high. Right? But his decision to escalate in Vietnam and send our troops over there was a terrible decision. And that decision cost him his presidency, because by 1968, he announced he wasn't running again. And so that fact alone made the 1968 election crazy. So those aren't really elections like you would think, not an election like we just had in 2024 here, where we have issues, we have candidates, and we vote, right? And we make a decision. Okay, there were bigger issues going on in those. So if there were elections in Ukraine, and this is the funny part, so Zelensky's approval ratings are higher than Trump's according to which polls you look at, but he's up there. Zelensky has somewhere in the neighborhood of 58, 57% support. If they held an election, there is a good possibility Zelekskyy might lose, but the person he would lose to is Zelekskyy. Zelekskyy is a former general that Zelekskyy fired, and he's even more anti-Russia than Zelekskyy. He's even more zealous. So, Zelekskyy has popular support. People of Ukraine support him. They support the war. They want their freedom, and they're willing to fight and die for it. And they've shown that. And I've got these people, no, Zelekskyy was put in by the deep state. Yeah, because, the people of Ukraine are not real people. They're just computers, I guess. The CIA dials up a phone number somewhere, and the deep state dials up a phone number, and tens of thousands of people gather in Maidan and get beaten up by Russian shock troops and shot and killed because the deep state, our deep state over here, said so. And then when our deep state actually showed up at Maidan in the form of Victoria Nuland, she told them to go home. She tried to break it up. She tried to stop this revolution. Our system, our deep state was against Ukraine, right? So is a bunch of nonsense. The deep state cannot convince people to go and fight and die. The deep state can't create a war like this, where people are willing to fight. If the people of Ukraine did not want to resist the Russians, the war would have been over no matter what. Okay? So please, people, use your brains, rub your brain cells together, make them work, and think, right? Some of this rhetoric and this propaganda is nonsense. Russia invaded Ukraine. They're the aggressors. They're the people who are raping and murdering children. They're the people who are the bad guys. That is very plainly obvious. If you don't know that, you need to get away from your woke right propaganda and go read some real news. Now, I know it's hard to find because it's not on CNN. It's not on Fox News. Go out to X and go find some real news. Go listen to people who actually report the news. The Telegraph, which is a British newspaper, has a podcast called Ukraine the Latest. Great news source for learning about what's going on in Ukraine. You can go out and make friends like I've done with Ukrainians and listen to them. And they'll tell you what's going on in their city, why they're going to bomb shelters because the Russians are targeting civilians. Okay, so go find out what's going on for yourself. Don't just whatever. And think in moral terms. Okay, we have to know right from wrong. We cannot call good evil, and we cannot call evil good. Okay, so with the resource deal, I understand what Trump's doing there. It makes it profitable for us. $500 billion we get out of it. If American companies and Americans are there doing the mining at all or involved in the mining, that puts a U.S. presence there without putting in U.S. troops, right? There's that kind of stuff. I get that. Okay. I don't agree. I don't think we need anything back. I don't think we need to be rewarded for doing the right thing. I think that the fact that the Ukrainians have ground down, they haven't completely defeated, but they've ground down our greatest enemy for $175 billion. My friends, we spend $950 billion a year on our defense budget, and we don't get any kind of result for that. I mean, we got better results with that $175 billion, and apparently half of it didn't go anywhere. So for $100 billion, we have, basically defeated our greatest enemy with the help of the Ukrainians. I'd say we can call that good. And that's why I'm angry that, we don't have this moral perspective. So I've told you, I will be honest with you. And I will be honest in my analysis of this administration, good, bad, and ugly. And if America is abandoning a moral foreign policy, I'm deeply concerned for the future. Because if the right comes off of morality, then we are... anyway, I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But I mean, we're headed to dangerous territory because the left wouldn't know morality if it bit them in the arse, So anyway, this talk of peace, on the one hand, like I said, Trump is right. There isn't the will in the West to do something. And if there is, the Europeans need to go and do it. And they don't need to ask our permission. And they just need to make it happen. On the other hand, I mean, we still need to be calling the bad guys the bad guys. So anyway, we'll see what Trump has up his sleeve. I know he's saying he just wants the killing to stop. I mean, it's a terrible negotiating position. I mean, it's the same thing we did in Vietnam. We went to the North Vietnamese and said, hey, we'll form a coalition government in South Vietnam where the communists will be brought into the government. We'll end the war. There'll be a ceasefire. Everything will be great. And the North Vietnamese are like, no, we want it all. We're going to take over the whole country. And if you send soldiers to South Vietnam, we will kill them in large numbers. And they did. And when we had to bomb the snot out of North Vietnam in order to get it. Was any of it worth it? I don't think there's an argument you can make. With the benefit of hindsight, obviously, we know how it all turned out. Okay. I had a lot of other stuff I could talk about on this. I will in the future. But I just hope it turns out better than, if, because right now we seem to be signaling the Axis powers that they can just do whatever they want. And, America's in bed. We've gone to sleep. Xi Jinping, have fun. Do your worst. Do whatever you want. All right. Back to this question of the morality thing. There have been a lot of attacks on Winston Churchill lately from the woke right. Not just this Daryl Cooper neo-Nazi guy who was on Tucker Carlson No surprise, Tucker Carlson's an infamous anti-Semite, so so he's out there spouting his bigotry and spreading it around some more. But we have, that nonsense. But why Churchill? Why is everyone going after him? And this is the crux of my problem with the woke right and the abandonment of morality on the right. Like, we used to be the Christian right. We used to be people who were, who read our Bibles, who were talking about morality, and now we're like, anything goes, mass murder, rah, rah, rah. What? People are after Zelekskyy on this stuff. And it's like, I've told people, you do know that Stalin was our ally for 4 years, right? Like, we found, there were bad guys out there like Hitler who were worse than Stalin, in our opinion. They were at war. We chose to ally ourselves with Stalin. Zelensky's nothing, like, compared to that. I mean, on his worst day. So, I mean, there's not any moral reason not to support our allies against our enemies. So, even if you think that the ongoing fighting is immoral, whether Putin will be willing to make a peace deal, I don't know. Anyway, so why is everyone going after Churchill? Here's a couple of things. Every European Jew who survived the Holocaust owes their life to Winston Churchill, right? His decision not to surrender is the only thing that brought down Hitler, right? Without U.S. support, chances are the Soviet Union would have fallen eventually. And even if they hadn't, a knockdown, drag-out war that neither of them could win was, they just beat each other over the head until, they couldn't fight anymore. It would have exhausted both of them. Probably the Nazis end up winning that, or winning within certain degrees, gaining Russian territory and this kind of thing. Anyway, Churchill was the one who prevented that, because Churchill stood on moral grounds. He knew Hitler was a psychopath. He knew he was bad. And he said, there's right and wrong in the world. Hitler is the wrong. We are the right. And that's it. We're fighting the war. We'll fight them in the air, on the ground, in the field, on the beaches, and in the streets. We will never surrender. Right? Winston Churchill. The attacks on Winston Churchill by people on the woke right are an attempt to undermine our sense of morality. And that's just incredibly dangerous, my friends. It's got to stop. So that's something I want to say on that. Watch for it. I'll talk more about it in the future. So I had a couple of other things I was going to talk about. I'm just going to lightning round a few things that I was going to tell you about. But, I've talked a little bit about the Senate in 2026. There are some polls out there and models on the U.S. House. Depending on whom you ask, the Republicans look like they're safe to win about 211 or 212 seats. There are somewhere between 18 and 24 toss-ups, depending on whose model you're looking at. And if you look at it that way, I mean, it's like, so at 211, 212, the Republicans are 6 or 7 seats from a majority as things are lined up for 2026 right now, whereas the Democrats would have to win, overwhelmingly those toss-ups in order to win. And it just doesn't look like with their unpopularity they're going to have any kind of landslide in their direction. All right, Elon Musk. Not liking the things he's tweeting about, but I'll leave that to one side for a moment. He's doing excellent work with Doge. So one thing he commented recently, we've got all this stuff out there about the evil Elon Musk. Elon Musk is bad. He's destroying the civil servants. Right. Elon Musk is proposing a pay increase that we pay top-level bureaucrats more so that they are disincentivized to be corrupt. It's such a bad guy, and he's saying we should pay civil servants more, right? Well, I guess maybe Elon Musk isn't as evil as they think he is. I don't know. There's that. With the budget and the impound, real quick, I just wanted to talk about, because, I talked about my budget plan where I would use the impound basically wrap the impound into a line item veto for the president on the budget. That's just my idea. You're welcome to your own. But the stuff that Doge is doing, we're going to end up with a court case on it, because presidents used to have the power to impound. I've talked about that. Thomas Jefferson's impounds, Richard Nixon. Congress got mad at Nixon, so of course they passed a law saying that the president couldn't impound funds anymore. But if, on the one hand, we want funds to be spent the way Congress says, because we don't want them being spent, financing terrorism or, trans plays in Colombia or whatever. Anyway, on the other hand, the president has this power to impound. So that's probably going to the Supreme Court. SCOTUS is going to have to decide whether, the president has the power to impound funds. So far, the courts have been on the side of Congress on that. We'll see what they do. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes. And then, that's also part of the ongoing effort to balance the budget is, if the president can impound funds and this Doge thing, the Doge clock is, over 120 billion last I checked. I mean, they're saving us a lot of money. We're headed toward balancing the budget. And I talked about my plan, my idea, and Elon and others have talked about it as well, that if we can make any kind of payment on the national debt basically ceases to be a problem. Okay, well, I've talked to you guys for a full episode. I've got a few other issues I want to talk about, not tonight. If I would post every week, I could talk about these things. So I need to try and do that. So it's been a hard week for me, and it's been emotional, and I'm a little upset. As a patriot, I support America first, but also our allies, right, in the world. And that doesn't mean you're a globalist because you support America doing the right thing, okay? I have a little faith. I think the Donald's onto something bigger. I hope, I pray. So we'll see. I'll wait and see. But I'm not liking the way things are going right now. We don't look good this week. So hopefully the president will make a great speech and we'll start looking better coming, in the days that are to come. So with that positive note from your gregarious Vulcan, I will say, as always, goodbye, Lehitrot.
Writers of the history, stand with me, look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes by. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Living in a fantasy, ecstasy, everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes wild. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. טובים אחד Bring them back home.